All right, good morning, boys and girls. In case you don't recognize that, that's one of the NFL theme songs. It is Friday, April 24th, 2020. I don't know if many of you watched it last night, but it was the start of the 2020 NFL draft last night. I imagine Nick Gomez and Luke Gobler may have been watching. Anyway, as a Giants fan, I wasn't overly pleased with their first pick, but we'll see how that works out. As a Clemson fan, I was pretty happy that two guys got picked in the first round. And as a New Yorker, I thought maybe the Jets made a good choice for what they need. But we will see. So, Friday, end of week 6, and we're working our way through Rome. So please get your social studies book, open up to page 291, and today we're going to be reading about society in the Republic. Like other ancient societies, Rome was divided by gender and class. Men and women had their own social roles. The lives of wealthy Romans were very different from the lives of poor Romans and slaves. Here we are once again, boys and girls. Slavery in one of our ancient societies. Roman men and women. Rome was a patriarchal society. This means that men ruled their families and that people traced their origins through male ancestors. You know, interesting thing for many of you, if you ask whose last name you have, do you have your dad's last name that he grew up with or your mom's last name that she grew up with? How do we do last names here in this country? So you might want to ask mom or dad tonight. Most of you probably already know. What power did fathers have? The oldest man in a Roman family was called the paterfamilias, or head of the household. He owned all the family's property. In theory, a father had absolute or unlimited power over his wife, children, slaves, and underage siblings. He could sell his children into slavery. He could even kill them if he chose. In practice, however, a father's power was limited by custom. In fact, many fathers felt that doing one's duty to their families was one of the highest Roman virtues. This duty also included honoring ancestors and continuing the family name through sons. We got to stop for a second and talk about this because this in today's world sounds a little crazy. So the father had unlimited power over basically the rest of his family. The fact that he could sell his children in slavery or even kill them, just it seems absolutely crazy, doesn't it? But luckily, that is not what the majority of fathers would do. Most of them, they felt it was the most important thing they did was to be a good father and be a good husband. So luckily, there wasn't many children being sold into slavery or killed by a parent. Just that absolutely amazes me, though. What was the role of women? Roman women enjoyed more freedom than Greek women. Unlike most Greek women, they could own personal property. Also, unlike many Greek women, Roman women took an active role in social life. Women went to parties, enjoyed the theater, and participated in religious rituals. So, unlike some of the Greek women that we learned about who really almost couldn't even leave the house, the Roman women went out and participated in things and had a social life. Much nicer place to live. They could make wills, divorce their husbands, and go out in public. In addition, rich wives and mothers could sometimes influence public decisions through their husbands and sons. But as you have read, women could not vote, attend assemblies, or hold public office. According to the Romans, the most important role of a Roman woman was to bear children and raise them to follow traditions. The ideal woman was a faithful wife and mother devoted to her family. How did the rich and poor live? Most Romans were poor, free people, or people who were enslaved. A tiny minority were wealthy. Living the good life. Most wealthy Romans earned their money from agriculture, farming. They owned huge farms worked by poor Romans or slaves. The landowners grew rich from what these people produced. Other wealthy Romans earned their fortunes through business. Upper class Romans lived in 1 or 2 story houses as large as a city block. These homes had courtyards, gardens, private baths, beautiful decorations, and even running water. That's pretty amazing to think that this long ago there were some people who already had running water in their houses. Many elite families also owned villas or large country homes. Similar to what you guys see, you may have some friends who, they own an apartment or something in the city, and then they also own a house out here in the Hamptons. So it was the same way back then. You had your city home and you had your villa out in the countryside. What was life like for the common people? Okay, so remember, the common people is the bulk of people, the majority of people who lived in Rome. Life was different for poor Romans. In the city, most poor people lived in cramped apartments without running water. Crime, disease, and fire were serious dangers. Apartment buildings were often badly built and sometimes collapsed. Common men and women worked at a variety of jobs. Many were tenant farmers who rented land from wealthy landlords. Others worked as day laborers in construction or at the city docks. Some ran stores, taverns, or restaurants. Roman slavery. Slavery was very common in ancient Rome. As Rome became richer and more powerful, Romans bought or captured more and more slaves. As many as 40% of people in Rome in the year 1 BCE may have been enslaved. And right away, guys, it makes me think about what was that we watched? A Bug's Life. When you get to 40% of your population being slaves, you are really starting to have to worry about uprisings. So, how did enslaved people live? For most of Roman history, enslaved people had no rights. They were bought and sold as property. They could be beaten or killed by their masters for any reason. Children born to slaves were also slaves. Many slaves worked in mines or on large farms. These enslaved people often died quickly due to brutal treatment. Other slaves led easier lives. Some enslaved people worked in the homes of their wealthy masters. They performed housework for their masters. They probably had a more reliable source of food and shelter than the poor, free Romans. Some educated slaves worked as secretaries or teachers. Wow, imagine that. These slaves were usually Greeks, although they lived in much better conditions than other enslaved people. They could still be treated very cruelly. Enslaved people who served loyally could be freed as a reward. They could also save up to buy their freedom. Freed slaves became citizens and had the right to vote. Oh, here we go. Here's a good question. Did enslaved people fight back? Some slaves fought back against their masters. One famous fighter was Spartacus, who led an army of rebel slaves in the 70s BCE. They fought the Roman army and threatened to capture Rome before the Romans defeated them. Spartacus is probably the most famous Roman slave who participated in an uprising. Roman religion. Religion was an important part of everyday life in ancient Rome. Religious practices were at the center of the lives of Roman citizens, both with their families at home altars where they offered sacrifices and at many public events. Origins of the gods. The Romans worshipped hundreds of gods. Many were adapted from the Greeks or Etruscans. Others came from Latin traditions. Some came from people the Romans conquered. What was the government's role in religion? Rome had an established religion, an official religion supported by a government. Government officials also served as priests. They often consulted religious experts before making decisions. Romans believed that maintaining good relations with the gods was part of the government's job. Rome was also home to thousands of Jews, and Judaism was recognized by Julius Caesar as an officially permitted religion. The Romans tried to placate their gods or keep them happy. They believed that if they did certain things, the gods would give them what they asked for. They prayed, worshipped at home, built temples, offered animal sacrifices, and held games in the gods' honor. Romans, like Cicero, believed that their success was due to their attention to the gods. And here's a little quote from a primary source. I am quite certain that Rome would never have been able to be so great had not the immortal gods been placated or been made happy. And that is from Cicero in The Nature of the Gods. So, boys and girls, that was actually a pretty short lesson today. Should give you plenty of time to get your work done in your other subjects. We've got a rainy Friday here. I don't think it's going to be that nice out today. Maybe later on, curl up with a good book. Some of you might wait for tonight to watch a little more of the draft. We've got rounds 2 and 3 going on tonight. And I have a meeting. If you're watching this before 11:30, we have a big class grade level meeting today. And we've invited Mr. Long and Ms. Freeborn to stop in and say hello to everybody. So I hope you enjoyed that section today. I thought some of that stuff was pretty interesting. And I will see you all soon.